Good afternoon, folks. This is old Buster coming to you again. It's Saturday afternoon over here, getting ready for Sunday to post a new story. And we're going to take a look at what I got on my computer screen and TV set. We got a duck. It's called a mandarin duck. We're going to show the picture of it right now. That duck means a whole lot to me. Rightful proud of it. When I look at that duck, it tells me that there's a Lord God in this world, and Jesus and the Holy Ghost. Back on over here, Miss Lulu. Come on back here. But I want y'all to see that duck. The colors of that doggone duck, there ain't no way it got evolved from nothing. I'll guarantee you that. Well, I want to tell you that I'm not never going to deny Jesus Christ, so I'm just going to let you know if you don't like him, well, you probably won't like me too good. But anyhow, what I'm going to tell you, people been talking about my hats. Now, I'm going to show you the hats I got, and y'all can look at these hats. This here's my field hat, where I work in the field, and it keeps the rain off of me, the sun off of me, and whatnot. Then I got a everyday hat. Well, I'm just gomming around there with the boys. I got my old ball cap, I stick it on there, and that was given to me by Roth Construction. They've been in business since 1959. Known those boys for a long time. Kim and Kurt Roth out of Salt Lake City, Utah. Old Kim's the mayor of Sandy, Utah. It was last time I seen him. And then I got me my Sunday go to meeting hat. Lulu gave me this hat. So I got all kinds of hats. There's folks give me hats all the time, whatnot. Well, the story this week is old Brineger. Now, what I'm going to tell you, when I told you in the very first thing I ever recorded for you folks, was that these stories was true, some part of it true, and some of them just a little bit true that some I even made up. But this story happens to be true. You think I'm probably crazier than a loon, but I'm telling you this is a true story. There might be one or two little things that's a little different, but the names and all this stuff, as far as I know, as true as I can be. So here we go today. Brineger. Well, I'm going to have to wait a minute. I got to stop right here. I've had all kind of comments about the stories. I'm reading them. I don't have the makeup on. A lot of stuff like that. But I'm not a professional. They said you need to be a professional. Well, I don't claim to be, never will be, and don't want to be. But I just like reading my stories to you since folks want to hear them. I don't mind reading them. All right, old Brineger. Now, he was a mess. Buster said he didn't rightly know how Brineger come about to be around them there parts of Kentucky. But they say he was kin to some of the folks down on the river. The boy didn't have but an IQ of 35, you know. Now, not making light of the fellers being a few bricks shy of load, but the boy was a mess. I tell you, he's always in a pickle. When Buster and the boys went into town there in Beattyville whilst they was visiting Buster's people in the mountains down in Tipton Holler, of course, you know all the boys' cousins, so they kin anyhow, they'd see all manner of goings-on and folks Buster knowed from the family reunions and whatnot. Well, Walter, Jesse, and Hired would about always come with Buster, and they always had a high old time. Now, Jesse always was a mite skittish because of his pheromones, but the boys plumb shamed him to go every time. Just because he had them pheromones a-popping out on him, all the time, didn't mean he couldn't go nowhere. He just had to tough it on out and live with it. Well, there's another little splainifying I need to do to clarify this about Jesse and his pheromones. Well, when them old pheromones start, you're going to have a whole story about pheromones coming up here. When them old pheromones come on back in here, Buster was just funning Jesse. And you heard that he had his fingers crossed raised out back behind his back. Well, it come to find out later on in these stories, after they leave out of high school, go to college, that Buster found out from his chemistry friends with Jesse that them pheromones was a real deal. He done had more pheromones than most people, so he did have them pheromones jumping on him. The corn wasn't really that what it was, but them pheromones was true. Well, heck fire, they knowed fellers that would give their eye teeth for them pheromones. Get them ladies coming around, woo-wee. Well, one Saturday morning, all the boys went into town and toted some eggs for Buster's Aunt May, and was also fetching some groceries and staples for her. They come up on an A&P, which is a grocery store, and a sight they sure enough ain't ever seen before. There was old Brineger just a staring in the window glass with his nose pressed up flatter than a flitter on that there window glass. He was a gandering at something or another. They wasn't sure about that. But about that time he seed him a nanner and took to running into the store. Well, he come out a peeling that nanner and began to eating the peeling and throwed the nanner part on the ground. Well, it just wouldn't do, less'n Walter found out what the boy was a-doing that for. So Walter up and asked Brineger why he throwed the nanner part down and why he was eating the peeling. Well, Brineger said to Walter that he wasn't going to eat no stalk and just ambled on off eating that peeling. The boy didn't have but an IQ 35, you know. Well, there was little Hargis and Uncle Jasper. They was sitting on the steps of the Lee County Courthouse, whistling and whittling, when Buster and the boys come up. Well, Buster started in telling his great Uncle Jasper about Brineger and his nanner eating episode. Well, Uncle Jasper told Buster and the boys he was going to tell them a tale or two that was sure enough a true story. There was a time Brineger wanted himself a car. He wanted him a Pontiac car, so he had to get himself some money somewhere, so he went to see Mr. Porter down there at the funeral parlor. Well, he finally talked Mr. Porter into giving him a job around the funeral parlor and doing odd jobs. Now, Mr. Porter knowed Brineger's people and knowed they was good people, and Brineger wasn't a bad guy, but he knew he was a few bricks shy load and his elevator didn't go to the top, but they loved the boy anyhow. Well, Mr. Porter paid Brineger, but kept back all but just some spending cash so he could save up for his Pontiac car. Well, he knowed Brineger would spend his money if he had it in his pocket. It'd burn a hole right through it. That money would have been right through Brineger's hands and overalls and pocket in no time flat. Finally, one day, Mr. Porter come to Brineger and told him he done had enough cash to get his Pontiac car, and he would go with him to get it over to Hooker Hank's car lot. Well, now Brineger took to a liking of working at the funeral parlor, and the folks there sure got a kick out of him too. He was caught many a time just a jabbering away at some dead feller he knowed, and like he was still alive. He just pet him and comb his hair and make sure he was fit for his send-off. Well, one day Mr. Porter found Brineger setting up old man Crow that lived down the holler from Brineger's people. He was a jabbering and a jawing with old man Crow like he was still alive, and even had a picnic lunch set up for the two of them. Overheard him tell the old man he just couldn't leave him go hungry, but he had to leave him his squirrel dog if he was going to go over to the other side. Well, that boy, you know, didn't have but an IQ of 35. Of course, it wasn't his fault none. When Mr. Porter took Brineger over to Hooker Hank's car lot, and Brineger picked him out a Pontiac car, a red one at that, he told Brineger he needed to be careful driving home that night because the fog got real bad in the late evening in the hollers. Well, Mr. Porter never thought to ask if Brineger could drive or not. Come to find out he couldn't, and the salesman had to give Brineger instructions on how to start the dang thing and put it in gear. Well, Brineger left out of there a bucking and a jerking, and he was all over the road. Well, now Brineger finally got on towards the house when he up and stops at the fork by the big oak tree. Of course, everybody knowed where that was. Well, some of the folks thereabouts was coming from the field and see Brineger back up that Pontiac car of his'n that he just bought and give her the gas and run smack dab into their oak tree. If he done it once, he did it twice, but the third time he tore that Pontiac car all to pieces. Well, Brineger got out the car, walked right up to that old oak tree, and they heard him say that he hated that oak tree and it was always in his way and he was going to knock it down come hell and high water. I know, he didn't have but an IQ of 35. Wasn't his fault. Brineger walked off towards his house down the road and just left the Pontiac car smashed up against the old oak tree. The folks were plumb bug-eyed watching his and carrying on, and went to town and told the sheriff what all happened out there with Brineger. The sheriff had a wrecker get the Pontiac car and went to Brineger's folks and had a settee with them about Brineger. The sheriff asked him if he had a driver's license, and Brineger didn't even know what a driver's license was. He only had an IQ of 35. He couldn't get no driver's license, you know. The sheriff done give Brineger a ticket for no driver's license and told him to be in the courthouse. Well, Brineger didn't show up for his hearing, and the judge told the sheriff to go arrest Brineger for not being there. Well, Brineger seen the sheriff a-coming and hid under the bedstead, and Sheriff Hogan had to drag him out of there with him a-squalling like a pig under a gate. He wasn't going to go, but he had to go. After Brineger was took to jail and give his supper of a fried bologna sandwich, tater chips, turnip greens, and macaroni and cheese, Brineger quieted on down right smart and went off to sleep, just like a pig in the sunshine, you know. Well, the next day, Brineger went before the judge, and he told Brineger he should have come to his court date and sentenced him to a month of working for the city. Well, Brineger was to work with the street department and pick up trash and such. Well, sir, the first day went along pretty well, with Brineger waving to folks and visiting and all, and the work wasn't much to it. But when it come on to nightfall, Brineger run off to his folks' house. The sheriff had to go get him again and to keep him locked up till his time was up. Brineger just couldn't figure out why he couldn't go home every night, and so his folks had to come into town every day till he was let loose. That boy's a pistol, you know, and him only with an IQ of 35. Well, Uncle Jasper said he had another good one on Brineger. The time he went and run off to join up in the army, and his folks didn't know nothing about it neither. That was a devilish time for him, I tell you. The army folks took Brineger to Cincinnati, Ohio for his induction. Well, all of the men stood in line till they was caught. Well, every time Brineger got to the front of the line for his physical checkup, he'd run back to the end of the line. He done that all day long. Finally, he was the only one left, and the sergeant got a hold of him and said he done dodged his turn long enough. Boy, he's a mess. I know y'all think this ain't true, but it's just true as I can tell you. It was all them doctors and soldiers could do to get Brineger examined and do the coughing thing, if you know what I mean. It come time for Brineger's testing, and they took him into a room for all manner of written tests. Well, Brineger could write his name, but nothing else. When it was all said and done with, all them test papers showed was his name. Not one question was answered. So he was sent to a shrink, one of them psychiatrist fellers, and that doctor liked to pull his hair out trying to get anything out of Brineger. He wrote on his papers that Brineger wasn't fit for the service and he was to be sent back home. Well, Brineger was took to the bus station and put on the bus back to Beattyville. When the bus got to Beattyville, well, it didn't get to Beattyville, I take that back, it got to Louisville. And Brineger didn't know to get off and change buses to get home. He should have got on in there that evening, and his folks was waiting for him to get there to take him home, but he never showed. Oh, what a mess that boy is. It took 2 days to find Brineger, and he was pretty near caved in. He was hungry. An army man had to be sent all the way back east to fetch Brineger and take him on home, because Brineger never got off the bus when he had to change. The boy didn't have an IQ of 35, and nobody knew that, so they couldn't help him. Uncle Jasper had many a tall tale on Brineger, but swore his an oath on the good book that they was true, and he knowed it personal that they was. There was a time Brineger was slipping off in the night and getting himself in a peck of trouble down on the river on the gambling boats drinking liquor and messing with painted women. Well, Brineger's ma had his paw to chain him up. He got so bad. And him having an IQ only 35 didn't leave no room for letting him out on his own. Well, Brineger got to pining and just wasn't going to eat no matter what. He just began to wasting away and got so pearly that them chains just fell off of him and he done run off again. They had the dangedest time keeping him home and away from that river and that liquor and them painted women. Well, Brineger took sick after that and ain't nobody seen him for quite a spell. Russell, now this is Buster's paw, come over the hill in that 59 Oldsmobile of his'n and was a hitting over 100. That's when he went airborne and took out a passel of samplets on the mountainside. Russell was always lucky and tweren't hurt another bit. Not an air scratch. Well, Russell see Brineger coming by with his mule and wagon and got a ride with him into town. Well, Russell asked Brineger where he'd been for so long, and his Said folks thereabouts thought he might have done up and sprouted wings. No, said Brineger, I just been up to my sister's in Tennessee and just now got back to the house. Now Russell was a bit of a conniver and tells Brineger that he wondered if he would like to do some logging for him. Well, Brineger said sure enough, he needed some hard cash and he was going to go down to the river. It had been a spell, but it was real exciting for him with that liquor and them painted women. Well, Russell asked him if he wasn't a-sinning down there, and Brineger up and says it ain't a-sinning if you're saying your prayers. Oh, that boy, I told you he was a mess. Well, Russell said that just might be so, and to come on by in the morning, and his and sister Naomi, that's Buster's aunt, would fix up some breakfast in the morning before they left on out to the woods. Well, Brineger meets up with Russell the next morning, and they get to logging. Well, when payday come, at the end of the week, Russell pays Brineger, but said he had to borrow back some cash since he left all of his back at the house and give him an IOU. Well, Russell told Brineger that it was the same as hard cash, but just on a piece of paper. Well, the next week come and payday rolled around again. Well, Russell done give Brineger another IOU and told him he had to keep up with the expenses and didn't Brineger want to keep his job a logging with him. Well, Brineger told Russell yeah, and he went on back to work. Well, Brineger asked Russell if they was going to take his IOU papers down at the river because he just had to go see one of them gals down on the gambling boats. Well, Russell reckoned they would if it was the right color, because they only accepted green. Greenbacks talk down there, he said. So Russell said he would have to change his IOUs to green, but it would cost Brineger to do that, 2 for 1. Well, Brineger sure wanted them greenbacks, so he done it. Well, come next week, and Brineger come to Russell and said it just wasn't working because they wasn't going to take his greenbacks, and he wanted some hard cash to spend. Well, Russell told Brineger he could do that, but it would cost him for hard cash, and Brineger didn't have enough greenbacks, and he'd owed Russell if he changed them back. Lord of mercy. Well, Russell told Brineger that he'd have to work another week to get even, and then he'd get some hard cash. Well, Brineger worked out in the woods, and Russell bought Brineger a few coats and some bologna for some sandwiches, and come Saturday, Russell told Brineger they was even. Well, Brineger told Russell that he was ready to get on down to the river, and when could he get him some hard cash? Well, Russell told Brineger that he was even with him, and in fact, he really owed him for feeding him that week, but he would forget that. Well, Brineger told Russell he really did appreciate that and would be glad to work next week and finally get his in hard cash. Well, Russell told Brineger that work had slowed down and they wasn't going to work for a spell, but he would fetch him when they needed to cut some more wood. Well, Brineger said thank you and went on back to the house just a grinning because he'd done so good that month. Brineger only had an IQ of 35, you know. And that Russell was a slickin', I tell you, a conniver for sure. Well, Brineger done all sorts of things folks seed him a-doing. One winter they seed Brineger out by the courthouse flagpole standing there with his tongue stuck to it. The county judge himself brung some warm water and poured it on Brineger's tongue to get him loose, with him just a caterwauling, trying to pull it loose on that froze up flagpole. Then there was a time he done stuck his and Hade in the bucket down at the bakery whilst he was trying to lick the icing out the bottom of it. You see, Brineger watched them scooping out the icing for baked goods, and when they set down the bucket, he stuck his and Hade in there and was licking up the leavings. Had to call the fire department on that one. Brineger is sure enough a mess, and his and Ma and Pa just love him dearly, and so do other folks, but what can you expect? He only has an IQ of 35, you know.